Got it.
And
Okay.
hello, everybody. Welcome to the book launch for Paganism for Prisoners. Joining us today is our fabulous author, Awyn. For those of you that don't know, Awyn and I got to meet when we were both in prison. So look how far we've all come, right?
Definitely.
Right? So I'm so glad that I get to do this with you today. I can't tell you how proud of you I really am. This is amazing what you have accomplished. And I know, small spoiler, but there will be more books coming.
There will.
For anyone that doesn't know. Yes. So we're going to start today with, for anyone that doesn't know you, obviously, your first book is Paganism for Prisoners, which is available for purchase at most major retailers. It's published by Llewellyn. So anywhere that you can find Llewellyn books, you can find that lovely green cover. Yep.
So
perfect. So for people that don't already know you, hopefully we get lots of those today. Like I mentioned, you are formerly incarcerated. Spent some time in a state correctional facility. As we've discussed before, nobody lands in prison because nothing ever happened to them. So we all have trauma in our background, right?
That's absolutely true.
Right. But since then, we always talk about what we've learned from that experience. So since then, you went back to school and received a BS in integrative healthcare. You also did some training and have become a Reiki healer. For those of you that don't know, that is energy work. You are also a high priestess, a magical teacher. After leaving prison, you became a Department of Corrections volunteer chaplain, right? Like, who does that?
Only weird the first time.
Right? And then you also have training in mental health and as a peer specialist. So there's so much to get into there. Why don't we start with a little bit? Why don't you please tell us why you wrote this book? Like, why this book and not something else?
Well, so it really started when I was inside and I found myself, I was probably the freest person in prison, actually. I say that a lot, but so I'm going to assume that most people watching this have not been to prison. So every day I got to leave the facility and go work manual labor in the fields with the sun on my face and the dirt beneath my hands and plants growing out of the earth. And it was very primal and very real. And luckily, the prison that we were at, had several books on paganism. And I already knew, even back then, that I was pagan because I had found a book years ago. I just I just kind of paid it lip service all those years. And then when I was in prison, like, that was the first time I really felt connected to the gods and the goddesses. And so when I got out of prison, I took a year and a day class and I ended up teaching that class, got my first degree, my second degree initiation. And there were chaplains that used to come down to the prison, and I ended up reconnecting with them one day. And they kind of inspired me to go start taking a course in. So something I discovered when I was taking a program into the prison was this look on the women's faces. At the time, I only went into women's facilities, and but the look on their faces, it was like mentally, spiritually, they were being fed for the first time. And I began to ask myself, like, how can I reach more people? And so that was really the inspiration for paganism for prisoners, was reaching more people and helping people find the spiritual connection that I found, because I completely attribute paganism to being one of the key factors in why I'm not a recidivism statistic and why I never went back. And so if even one person reads this book and they don't go back to prison, then it's a huge, massive success. So that's a little bit of the inspiration behind it.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about, just because I think some people might be curious. So the chaplains that she's talking about were indeed the chaplains that came inside to our prison. And so I'm curious, how did you reconnect with them? Like, did you just run into them at the grocery store? Like, sort of what's that little story of how you reconnected with them?
You know? Oh, it was at, I have to think about that because it was so long ago, and it was one of those, like, chance encounters, but I think it was at, a local pagan pride day, and they were manning a booth, and, they remembered me, as of course they remember a bunch of us who they were spiritual advisors to, and, we ended up talking, and we kept in contact, and actually it was, they gave me my second degree initiation, and then chaplain Martin passed over, across the veil a few months after I started going into prisons, and so me and Kara went in for a while, and she ended up giving me my third degree initiation, and so yeah, we connected by an act of the gods, so to speak, like right time, right place.
Right. That's how synchronicity works. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it is. So, one of the other things we're doing today, and why I was so excited to host your book launch, is I now work for an organization called Breakthrough. And with Breakthrough, we get to go back inside, right? Breakthrough is a program that focuses on education. I think a lot of people, like you said earlier, we're assuming lots of people don't know what incarceration looks like. And people often make assumptions and they sort of think that, oh, you get all kinds of programming and you get college classes and you get all of this programming, and that's true on sort of, right? Like, and every state's different, right?
Mhm.
But having education, and I think, not that I want to speak for you, but we'll talk about this, that having those educational opportunities inside can absolutely make the difference for someone. For a lot of people, going to prison is your rock bottom, right? And you're
Yeah.
seeking, like you were, right? You're seeking for the thing. Like, everyone has a thing. Maybe it's arts, maybe it's CrossFit, maybe it's education, like whatever it is, you have a thing that inspires you to, it's time to do my life differently, right? And so
Exactly.
what I love about Breakthrough is we are providing that. Like, I did the program inside at that prison. I love how you talk about recidivism, because I'm one of those folks that went back. Like, I didn't get it the first time, right? And I had to go back in to figure it out. And it was surreal to be there and watch you come back in, right, as a volunteer. Like, it was really cool it was a little humiliating, right, for me
Aw.
personally, right, because I didn't do it, right, but I was so proud of you, and it was cool to sit and, you're right, watch how sort of you were able to come in and, like, if we use the analogy of like plants and gardening, like, you were able to water the spirits of those ladies that were inside, and that's a hugely impactful thing. And so we wanted to, Breakthrough wanted to support you in this first book, because education is so incredibly important for folks inside. The system does not have the budget to educate everyone that comes into prison. At least here in Colorado, they're state mandated to help people get their GED. But if you want something above and beyond that, typically it's volunteer programs, faith-based or not. Breakthrough is not faith-based, who are providing those educational opportunities. So I know you talked a little bit about working farm crew when you were inside. Did you have access to any sort of education that really helped you, or was it really just your self-study and like your search for paganism that really fed your soul while you were inside?
So I applied for every program, but because I had already done 2 years in a community corrections program, and then so my time in prison wasn't going to be years and years and years, I didn't qualify for a single one of those programs. So for me, everything was self-taught and self-guidance. There were other people who got to do like cosmetology and like flagging and like get all these certifications, and I already had a high school diploma, so I didn't need the GED classes. So really, it was the books in the library and the fact that I was too busy and tired to get into any trouble.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, that's a big deal. So for folks that are maybe thinking that people can get all of that inside, yeah, not always. So if there's a volunteer program in your community that you can help support, we absolutely encourage you to do that, because the people inside really need that sort of touchstone that they haven't been forgotten and they do matter to somebody, right?
Well, and you mentioned the college classes earlier, and I think it's important to mention that funding for those classes has been dramatically cut all across the US. It is so much tougher to get into those classes. The places that fund those usually only fund a class or two classes. And so it's not like you just, I think people have this idea that you go to prison and you just sleep for like a year and that's all you do. And like, oh, I wish I could get a vacation, but it's not. It's, you have to work a job for 10 cents or 12 cents or whatever it is now. Um, you have to be engaged in a program if you're there for long enough, and then you're in a situation where you get virtually no support. And so for anybody who just thinks, oh, well, they get 3 hots and a cot, I say this to you: women have to buy their own tampons in prison, and they're the same price they are out here. And so if you're making like $3 a day, it takes you 2 full days of work to buy a box of tampons that are a medical necessity. So, I think there's a lot of misconceptions that really need to be tackled when it comes to incarceration. And hopefully we'll get to this later, but also the things that lead to incarceration.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think so many people, like you said, they make so many assumptions. And until you actually meet folks inside and really talk about what that could look like, that's part of education, right? We're making sure people are educated about what that could look like, right? So I want to jump into your book a little bit.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, you were going to read an excerpt from your introduction, right?
Yes, that's correct. So once again, Paganism for Prisoners, available wherever books are sold. So the introduction. Witchcraft saved my life, quite literally. I spent nearly a decade of my adult life living in active addiction. There was no substance I was unwilling to try, as long as it kept me from having to face what lived inside me. As frequently happens with this type of lifestyle, I found myself behind prison bars. It was here, away from the noise of the world, that I first began to actively look for my spiritual side. I knew even then that I was pagan, for I had come across books on paganism and the words within resonated with me. But I was not living in a manner befitting my witchy self. I was lost and had been for a long time. Now, looking back, I see my time in prison as a period when I got to reset the switch on my life. During periods of lockdown, I found myself resuming my search for the gods I had never stopped believing in. I was fortunate enough to be in a prison that had several books on Wicca. I read them all. Not only did I read them, but I meticulously copied spells, symbols, phrases, anything I thought would be useful into the little blue books you can buy on Canteen. This hobby of mine kept me from getting into situations that could have lost me earned time. There were 2 Wiccan chaplains who came into the Department of Correction on a regular basis, Martin and Caradwin. They were always willing to meet with any inmate, regardless of their faith, and provide anything from birth charts to tarot readings to a shoulder to cry on. Little did I know they would later play an even bigger role in my life than they did while I was in DOC. When I got out on parole, I was hungry to know more about the pagan path. I was lucky in that I found a class and a high priestess that would teach me and put me on my own path of priestesshood. I studied with her for several years and completed the advanced coursework. Putting this amount of focus into my spiritual life made parole not so difficult. I was learning how to be accountable, honest, patient, and the beauty of making small sacrifices to the gods. After completing the introductory year and a day course, another student and myself were tasked with leading that class, which we did for a few years. This was the first time in my life I had done anything selflessly. Each week, my co-teacher and I went to a coffee shop and passed on the information to that our high priestess had given us. She always told us that teaching was one of the skills that a high priestess would need. Having so many students depend on me to be there gave me motivation to not mess up on parole. These were an amazing few years. It is not uncommon for students to outgrow and drift apart from their teachers and be given another task by the gods. This is what happened to me. Shortly after I parted ways with my high priestess, I became reacquainted with the DOC chaplains, Martin and Caradwin. I had been off parole for 3 years and about a month. This put me just over the minimum time off paper to be eligible to volunteer in the prisons. My new purpose was clear. It was not long after I got the okay from both women's facilities that one of the chaplains, Chaplain Martin, passed over into the next life. Since then, Caradwin and I have been going into DOC on a regular basis. Each month, there is a new lesson for me to teach the inmates and new things for me to learn from them. This is one of the tasks the gods have given me, and it has become a great source of joy in my life. I truly cannot say how amazing it is to see the faces of these women light up. They are having their spirits fed. For some of them, it is the first time. The program has grown over the years, and true to the spirit embodied by the chaplains, I welcome those of any faith to attend, as long as they remain respectful. So right along those who identify as Northwest European pagan are those who call themselves a Satru or Druid, or those who walk the Native American paths, or even those who are unsure or who are curious Christians. The credit is not really mine, though. I am simply a vessel who tries to honor the voice of the gods and goddesses. I am trying to lead by example and show those who are serving time that no one has to go back to prison, and that it is possible to have a strong spiritual practice no matter where you are or what your life circumstances are. Not all of you reading this book will be pagan. Not all my students are pagan, but maybe there is something in here, some words, a concept, or a thought process that can help you find your path.
That's lovely. Thank you for sharing that with us. Hopefully that encourages some folks to run right out to your local book retailer and purchase this fabulous book. I do have a question for you, and I'm sure other people probably do as well. We talk in the book, you have a chapter on tools, and you sort of walk through, what sort of the basic tools of our faith are. For folks that are incarcerated, they don't have that access to tools. And if people had a question about, like, for their incarcerated friends, family, whomever, and they're curious about what sort of tools could be provided, how would you respond to the need for tools and how folks who are incarcerated can address that?
So this is actually a multiple part question. So whatever facility your friend or loved one is at should have a property list of what their incarcerated population is allowed to have. Now, it's going to vary a little bit depending on if they're at a minimum, a medium, or a maximum security prison, if it's state or federal, and what state they're in. But there's a property list. Now, where it kind of gets difficult is like technically every tool we could ever need is already within us, right? We've got the chalice, we've got the athame, we've got spirit, we've got all the elements within us, we've got all these things. However, what you'll see a lot is that inmates of another faith will be allowed to have things like crucifixes and prayer books and prayer rugs and other things that pagan inmates aren't necessarily allowed to have. Now, we were lucky because we got to have a chalice. It was small, little salt cup, tiny, tiny little thing, but it was technically a chalice. We got to have a wand, which is basically a cut stick. It's literally what they gave us, but it was a wand. It was something. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. So what you'll find is that some facilities have like a faith group property box. And in the box, you might find things that an individual inmate could not have. Like maybe there's candles in there. They can't be lit, but maybe there's candles in there. Maybe there's some salt or some herbs or things of that nature in there. And so even though an individual might not be able to have that stuff, it might appear in their property faith box. Now, where it really gets nitty gritty is when you start getting into states that are not as open-minded as Colorado. I can't even tell you how many letters I've gotten from people in Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, who aren't even allowed to meet They're not even allowed to claim their faith. And this is a violation of their rights. And it's happening a lot. And nobody really says anything because, oh, well, they're inmates. They shouldn't have gotten arrested, right? And so not a lot of people are advocating for it, but it's their First Amendment right to be able to practice their faith. And by denying people this, we're in violation of honoring their civil rights. And so there's big steps to change. Some areas like Colorado, you can write a letter, you can advocate, you can find out the proper person to connect with. There's usually like a faith coordinator or something like that in the prisons, and you can write to them and advocate and be like, hey, I've heard that pagan offenders don't get this, and I'd like to help them get it. And what is the process? When you get to states like Mississippi and Alabama, it's a whole lot bigger process, because even pagans on the outside aren't acknowledged. It's not as safe to be pagan in public. So for those, you can still do those same steps. You can still write to the faith group coordinator. You can advocate. Just I would just have you be prepared that it's going to take a little bit more work. It's going to take a little bit more to grease those wheels of change.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. So another thing, one of the parts I loved about your book was actually it's your first lesson, which I think is so empowering. You talk about the power of words and the power of silence, and I want to talk a little bit about that, because you have you mention in one specific sentence, or excuse me, paragraph, you're talking about how you had a hard time dealing with silence, and how like you really struggled to be alone with yourself. And so when you had that, I'm curious how we could share with folks inside and their loved ones, like why you feel like silence is important.
Well, silence is important. So consider that a lot of the incarcerated population, not all of them, but a lot of them have substance abuse history. Okay. Even more than that, have trauma, have horrible things, bad things, negative things, icky things in their past. And, because like nobody's like, I just graduated from Harvard, I want to go get 6 felonies. That's not how it happens. So what you have to consider is that people who have PTSD from childhood abuse or sexual abuse, or being yelled at, or even just not being given proper affection throughout their life, or having healthy boundaries, or having boundaries acknowledged, that it's comforting to have distraction. It's comforting to have, like the TV on while the radio's going while you're writing a book and playing on the internet and your phone's in your hand. Like all these things are a distraction that prevent you from sitting with yourself. So, and this is something I had to continue after I got out of DOC. But when you have those hours of lockdown, hours, and at some places, those hours upon hours of lockdown, and it's quiet, and like you're forced to sit with yourself, you have two choices. You can either learn to be okay with what's there, or you can let it drive you crazy. And it's a process. It's not just like, okay, I'm just going to be okay with it. But by starting to recognize that the silence, that stillness has a place, it has a purpose, and it's a powerful magical tool. Because if you're sitting there and you're trying to get answers from the gods, but you won't shut up, like, how are they supposed to give you the answers you're looking for? So silence is really, it's I think it's funny because it's the first lesson, and it's also one of the hardest lessons. And I think by putting it in the front, it enables people to keep working on it and to keep becoming better. And meditation is really huge for helping with this, because and focusing on breath is really huge for helping with this. And getting to sit with the silence also, that's what you need to be able to heal the trauma that's inside. You need to be able to recognize it, and hear the lessons it's trying to impart. And you can't do that if your head is full of noise.
Yeah, I love that. So before we jump into the next expert you're going to read, I wanted to ask you another part that I really enjoyed. I think it's so important for folks to do as they've sort of, like you said, getting comfortable with silence and knowing who you are is an ongoing practice that we practice all the time. But another thing that I really love, it's in your lesson 5. You talk about having like a daily ritual or a daily spiritual practice, right? For a lot of folks, it might be their prayer, right? Or whatever it is for them. And so sometimes I think, I'm sure you've recognized this as well, when folks are coming to our faith, here we are on the solstice and people are still trying to figure out what that looks like, right? Or what that means. And so I think often people really struggled with, they used to go to church and maybe they took communion and they prayed and like they have all of these rituals, right? That they were comfortable with. And then when they come to paganism, whichever branch they feel drawn to, they don't necessarily have the same spiritual practice. And so I love how you talk about putting together a daily spiritual practice. And I'm sort of curious, what is your current daily spiritual practice and what would you encourage people to start with?
Oh, that's okay. Do as I say, not as I do. No, so writing for me is a spiritual outlet. There's a lot of stuff I write, like when people are like, oh, you remember this part that you wrote in your book? And I'm like, no, I have no idea. I don't remember that at all. Because for me, I connect to spirit when I write. So my writing practice for me is part of my ritual. I have things I do on a weekly basis. Like I try to take a relaxing bath by candlelight, and I go into meditation on a regular basis. And if I wait too long, then the gods yell at me when I go back and they're like, you need to meditate more often. I'm like, okay, I will. And but like every day, like I'm not just a pagan on Sunday. I try to just live my life altogether in a way that honors the gods. I was with a friend the other day and we stopped and helped somebody push his cart over a hill because he was going to be there for hours. It was a random act of kindness. And these are the kinds of things that help connect with the gods. Now, when somebody's incarcerated, this is much tougher, right? Because you have other routines. You have get up, go to breakfast, come back for count, go to class, come back, count, lockdown, count. Like it's this repetitive it's these repetitive things, but you can do simple things like when you're walking, maybe you have to keep walking and you're not allowed to stop at your yard. It's a thing, people. It's a thing. Like keep walking. But you can take a second while you're walking and be aware of the sun and feel it, like really feel it. You can feel the breeze on your face. You can meditate in all those hours that you have on lockdown. You can meditate. You can read books. You can say, like, I think it's always funny when people ask if pagans pray. Of course we pray. Of course we do. And if you don't know what else to do and you need to go back to that old Christian way of like, okay, Odin, I don't know if I'm doing this right. I'm just trying to figure this. That's fine. Start with that. Like, it doesn't need to be overcomplicated. Like, even if you're like, you wake up in the morning and you're like, Goddess, be with me today. That's a routine. And that's something that can be done by anybody. So I would say start small, be consistent, and make it manageable. And then, like, if you miss a day, don't freak out and think that you're going to get a lightning bolt. Okay. Because let me tell you something, the pagan gods are far from perfect. If you don't believe me, read some Norse mythology, read like about like the Greek gods. Oh my God. Like, so they don't expect us to be perfect because they're not either.
Right. I love that. So as we're gathering today on the solstice, a blessed Yule to you, my friend. And let's go ahead and read. You were going to read, I think, from your Wheel of the Year chapter. Yes.
Yes. All right. Wheel of the Year. Every year, the changing of the seasons happens. Winter to spring, spring to summer, summer to fall, and back to winter. In modern paganism, this annual cycle is known as the Wheel of the Year. It is marked by 8 Sabbats, those are holy days, that are based off the cycle of the sun. Today, these days are known as Samhain, Yule, Imbolc, Ostara, Beltane, Midsummer, Lughnasadh, and Mabon. Back in the days before calendars and light bulbs, when the world was primal, people depended on the cycle of seasons for their very survival. Keep in mind that the winters in Northern Europe were dark, cold, and could be a scary time. When the winter solstice came, it was a promise that the sun would return and the land would warm. At Imbolc, the first flowers began to appear out of the snow. The cycle of seasons was the first way humanity had to track the passage of time annually. Before there was a standardized calendar, some areas would have festivals that would last for days or even weeks. People from all over the area would make their way to the meeting site. As new people arrived, they would carry on the festivities for those who were leaving. There was no concept of be here on October 31st at 8:30 p.m. Local farmers knew about when Beltane was, so that's when they showed up. In the Celtic tradition, Sabbats start at sunset and continue until the following sunset. For example, Samhain would last from sunset on October 31st to sunset on November 1st. When Christianity began to dominate, many of the Sabbats were integrated and given a Christian spin, but their pagan roots still show strongly through. There is an old saying, keep the Sabbats if you want to keep your witch power. This means that by honoring the Wheel of the Year, we acknowledge the changes within ourselves and stay linked to the continuous cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. Think about springtime. When we enter spring, our bodies tend to feel more active. We feel a desire to get rid of the things we have kept all winter. Call this spring cleaning. We are part of nature, not apart from nature. So this natural cycle resonates within us if we only listen.
I love that so much. I think so many people, when they come to paganism, they sort of get a little confused, right? And I think we both have seen this with, students, is they swing, that pendulum, the idea of a pendulum swing, right? And so they're coming from sort of the patriarchy and the dogma that's associated with that faith, which works really well for a lot of people. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for a lot of people, that doesn't work so well. And being able, and they swing real far over, right? And so I love how you talk about like we're a part of nature, and not so much we're just sort of looking at what really works for each individual person, which is what I love so much about our faith. One of the question I wanted to talk, and I meant to let you know, for folks that are here on our Zoom today, if you've got questions for our lovely author, you can just go ahead and drop them into the chat and we'll get to them in just a little bit. She's open to discussing the book, and so please, we encourage you to drop your questions into the chat and we'll get to them here in a little bit. I loved how you talk about knowing yourself in your lesson 12. I think it's so important. I loved how you talked about humility, and I loved how you really talk about ethics, right? And because I think sometimes we've met so many people that have misconceptions about what our faith is, right? And I love how you talk about a little bit about ethics, and a little bit, like you even talk a little bit of psychology for anyone that hasn't gotten that far in the book yet. Like she talks a little bit about ego. She talks a little bit about higher self. Like these are all things that folks deal with, I think, all the time, but they don't necessarily have language for them. And so I love how you're providing that for folks. I would love to sort of talk a little bit about when you, I know we've talked about this, like often when you're writing, you're sort of channeling, and whatever the gods need to say comes out through your pen or computer keyboard. And right. But
Right.
I love, like, how can you sort of, because I'm with you, I struggle with meditation as well. How do we sort of, I guess for lack of a better word, get out of our own way and just allow the magic to unfold?
Well, for a lot of it, it goes back to that silence lesson. I do actually, I talk a little bit about more about this in my second book, Paganism on Parole, which you will find in November. But for the time being, like, just like we have so much negative like I I I remember before I casted my first circle, I was so terrified of doing it wrong.
I
I
remember
was
that.
so just, "Oh my god, I'm gonna do it wrong, and I'm not gonna be allowed to be pagan anymore, and the gods are, like, never gonna work with me, and what if somebody finds out?" And, like, there was all this negative talk, and then I did it, and I was like, "Oh, that was no big deal. Like, that's fine. I could do that again," and I still do it, and so try it. If you're afraid of something, so there's two kinds of fear, right? There's the fear of like, ooh, don't go down that creepy dark alley. Listen to that fear. Okay, that's a good fear to listen to. If your fear is like, oh no, what if my book's not successful? Don't listen to that fear. Okay, two different types of fear. And I've experienced them both. Like I think anytime you're trying to do something great, something outside the norm, something that's not just, the day in, day out repetitive cycle of things. Anytime you're getting out of your comfort zone, you're allowing yourself to change. Like change isn't supposed to be comfortable. So become okay not being comfortable. It's okay. It's not going to kill you, I promise. Like it won't. Um, and so like sometimes you just got to take a deep breath and take that first step forward. And know that it's okay to be terrified, but you need to tell all those thoughts, all those negative thoughts that are like, you're not going to make it, you're not going to be good enough. What your mom always told you were this, blah, 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 whatever crap that is, just tell it to shut up. And it's after a while it'll start listening. It doesn't always at first, but you'd be surprised how powerful vocalizing that to your own mind is. Like sometimes I have to do that. I'm like, you need to stop it right now. And um it's an action and it's conscious thought. So
Yep.
just breathe and do it.
Love that. Yeah, you have to learn to tame that inner critic in your head because they don't always lead you down the right path.
They're so noisy too.
Right? Sometimes, yes. So, folks might not necessarily be aware that we have prizes today. We're going to be pulling names for a drawing. One thing we would love you to know is that, yes, of course, we have books for folks, but unfortunately, we are not going to be able to send any of those books inside to correctional facilities. So, if you're, maybe trying to connect a loved one to something like this, these books, they can in general, like if you have a loved one who you think this would be the perfect book for, we're going to encourage you to follow the rules of that specific correctional facility. Typically, they need to come directly from a publisher or like from an Amazon with a gift receipt. So if you've got folks inside, we would strongly encourage you to make sure you're following the rules of the facility, or else it will probably not get into them. And we want this book is so accessible, right? It's not written in a high-minded language. It's not, right? It is so accessible for anyone to read, whether they're in a facility or not. So we would encourage that. But so we do have some prizes today.
Yes, we do.
Yep. So let's start with, and so everyone that's on the call today will be put, well, it's all computer based. So you're not necessarily naming a hat anymore, but it is that same concept. We're going to start with, were you starting with our third prize? Is that how you wanted to do it today?
Yeah, third to first, and then so I will hold them up. Oh my god. Okay. I'm I will try to put them where you can see them actually. So our third prize is oh yes, and of course all of these come with an autographed book. So you just need to tell me who you want me to make it out to. Make sure that there's an address so I know where to send it to.
Right.
And then there's also this lovely necklace and these earrings by Anne Queen Art. She's very talented. She can make she's made shoes for me. Oh my gosh, so fantastic.
Yep. So we've linked that in the chat. So if anyone is curious about if you're not the winner today and you're interested in these lovely things, please, we've got the website linked in the chat. So this is our third prize. So our second prize, can you hold that up? And I'm linking that in the chat right now as well.
Is this lovely skull candle. We've got another set of earrings from Anne Queen. Oh, oh my,
What's
I
it
can't
smell
even
like?
tell you. Oh, it's clove, orange. There's some peridot in here.
Man, that's
Absolutely.
lovely.
Yeah, it's
And that one
beautiful.
comes with an autographed book as well.
Yes, and then this is from Lady Banshee. This is a Lady Banshee candle.
Yep. And then our first prize, my friend.
We've got a candle from Candles by Jay. I can't show you the top of this one because it's got all this amethyst and rose petals and a crown in here, but it's another exquisite candle. And then this lovely pair of earrings, these keys to unlock your future.
Clever.
Clever.
Very clever. Fantastic. So I would remind our folks on the call, if you have any questions for Awyn, please drop them into the chat. You can, if you're not comfortable sharing with everyone, you're more than welcome to send your questions to me in a direct message if you're more comfortable with that.
Do we have any questions on Facebook?
Not that I've seen yet. So here, your first question is, please. Let's see. I love how you list alternative tools in the book, and these can apply to how you can practice the principles outside of prison. I immediately think of how to apply the practice while traveling. Was this intentional to be able to share the practices with as many people as possible, especially once they've left a facility?
Absolutely. There are several. So even though this book is Paganism for Prisoners, I also designed it to also be a guide for people who want to go in and volunteer in prison but aren't sure what they want to teach. This is like a basic starter guide. And for anybody who has a limited capacity to carry tools with them. And interestingly, if you go to my author site on llewellyn.com, I've got articles on how to create a TSA friendly travel kit and how to use the contents of your hotel room to get all your tools. So you can go check those out as well. But absolutely, one thing I love about this book is it's not, it was written for inmates, but it's not only in language that people who have been incarcerated can understand, you know, and it's weird to say that because we speak the same as everybody else, but I don't think people recognize that, you know, there's some very eloquent, talented, artistic, amazing people behind bars. Just so much wasted talent. And a lot of it is due to drug use or codependency or systemic racism or, you know, like all these other things. So something to keep in mind.
Right. I did just drop your Llewellyn author page website into the chat. So if anyone hasn't gotten it before, please go check it out. And you're also on Facebook for anyone who doesn't know. So I just want to plug Breakthrough one more time. Breakthrough is where we are supporting because it's so important to have education in prison. Yes, creative outlets, but also educational pursuits help people really flourish and bloom, if we're continuing our gardening analogy. Do we have any other questions for our lovely author today? All right, I am not seeing anything else pop up. What final words of wisdom would you like to leave us with, please?
So I would like to challenge everybody to rethink what kind of conceptions and misconceptions they have about the incarcerated population. On a lot of the podcasts I do, I talk about how when you get out on parole, you're really restricted in where you can live because places won't rent to felons. And you have to like find a job that's also going to let you leave at 11 for group and sometimes early for UAs and hire a felon. And like there's all these cards that are stacked against people. And so if you're in a position, like you have apartments that you rent, consider opening up that policy. Consider hiring the person who has a record but is really trying. Like, everybody makes mistakes, and anybody is one decision away from a prison sentence. Like, they want you to think it's really hard to get to prison. It's not, though. It's really not.
It really isn't. Well, thank you so much for making time for us today. I know you're super busy, and actually bringing up your podcast brings up another question. If folks want to follow you and want to know where you're having podcasts, where can we find that information?
So I try to post all that stuff on awyndawn.com.
Okay.
It's also going to be published on my Llewellyn author page. But if you follow me on social media, Awyn Dawn Official on Facebook, and then at Awyn Dawn on Instagram and Twitter. I love putting that stuff out there. So it will not be hard to find out what events I have upcoming.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Any last minute questions, folks? Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody, for taking a little time out of your day to join us. Like we mentioned before, Paganism for Prisoners is available at any of your local retailers, online, anywhere where you can buy Llewellyn books. Please purchase her first book, Paganism for Prisoners, followed up next year by Paganism for Parolees. Thank you for your time, and we wish all of you a very happy Yule.
Well, we still have to do the drawings.
We've done the drawings.
Oh, you guys know who
Yes.
who won?
So Miss Mia has won. Yep, and I have her address and I have all of the details. And
Okay.
yep, and your admin will get you the rest of the. We've been flying fast and furious, but we have it.
Okay. As long as it gets to me, then that's fine. And one last thing I want to let people know is, if when you go buy my book, if you tag me on social media, like with a picture of your book, I will send you an author plate at no cost. I will just autograph an author plate and send it out into the mail. So yay.
Fantastic. That's so generous. Thank you so much. Alrighty, folks, have a great day and a wonderful Yule, and so glad the light is returning. Bye-bye, everybody.
Yule, everybody.